Welcome, dear listener, to Desert Island Gamer, a quick-fire interview podcast digging into those video games that shaped us into the wholesome, kind-hearted people we are today. The entirely original premise: one desert island, one guest, 3 games they adore, one game they abhor, and a carefully selected gaming character with which to spend an eternity of moonlit walks along the beach. It could be weird, it could be unhinged, and it could have crappy sound quality, but at least it will be short. To the island. Welcome to Desert Island Gamer, the podcast that proves you don't need talent, a clear speaking voice, or a good idea to launch a podcast. Today I welcome Rory Greenfield. Welcome, sir.
Thanks very much for having me.
You may recognise his voice. He's definitely no stranger to podcasts, but hopefully today we can lower the bar for your expectations of what a podcast should be. But you are co-host of Famous Last Nerds.
Yep.
Which is a podcast that is not only a magnificent deep dive into all sorts of wonderful films and games, is also a podcast that always makes me think, I wish I'd thought of Famous Last Nerds.
We came up with a few ideas that didn't exactly work, and then we liked it. It's really tricky finding a name because they're just all taken, to be honest. So You've done well to find anything that works, to be honest. So that's good.
Whether it works is questionable, but it's there now. So. Before we kick into the main event, I do like to do very ridiculous icebreaker questions. And the first of these will be, what is the favourite thing about the place you live?
So I live on...
You don't have to tell us where you live, just in case.
No, it's fine. No. I mean, I got abused from Everton fans for being a wall the other day for a couple of my tweets. So I live in Greater Manchester, but on the edge of the Peak District. So I'm kind of bordering Cheshire and Derbyshire and Greater Manchester. And I hike quite a lot. So my kind of big passion for the last few years has been hiking. Being next to the Peak District, I can get out towards, the hills and mountains within 20 minutes. So a big thing for me is just outdoor. I think I will work in an office again in Manchester, and the commute and all that kind of thing I do like doing. I like Manchester the city and all the kind of vibrancy of it. But in an evening on weekends, I like to get out more rurally, and then that's where I'm kind of at a little bit more peace, I guess, and get away from it all. So
with lockdown, is it harder to find a little space for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, because I know the area well, I probably know the areas that are probably less trodden. I've literally because I've had technically a sabbatical, I guess, which is not something I expected this year. I did some hiking in Scotland when we went there earlier in the year, and I've done some stuff in the Lake District. I usually go to Snowdonia most years, but in terms of the peaks, I've literally done everything I've wanted to do and tick box, I guess, a little bit. But it's good because none of it's too intense. It's not as high or as difficult as anywhere in the Highlands in Scotland or whatnot, or in the lakes, but it's still very, accessible. And there's times, you'd follow a certain route, but now I'm a little bit more comfortable to map read and know where I'm going. So I'll just rock up and I'll find a route, really. I'll find a way. So it's my escapism, really. So I very much enjoy it.
Question 2. If you could visit any fictional place from a TV or film for a 2-week break, where would you go?
Yeah, I've been to New Zealand, so I would still love to go back and say the Shire, or at least Middle Earth, I guess. New Zealand was always the kind of bucket list kind of destination, and I'd kind of go back in a heartbeat, but I know a lot of that is kind of clever with the way they've done it. I've been to a few of the set areas, but they superimpose the mountains in the back of different foregrounds. So it's never quite what you think it might be, but Middle Earth is fascinating, really. I've obviously read the books and all the kind of Hobbit and all the prequels, but the films were the thing that blew me away. I guess I was about 16 when the first one came out, and I was just like, never seen anything like it on screen, really. I'd never really seen anywhere with the use of sets like that. Although I'd say things like the Motorcycle Diaries do it in a different way. And there's certain films, Rio was always fascinating to me because of City of God, even though it does portray it in a very interesting light. But South America was quite fascinating. And I hadn't really seen that growing up. The exposure to kind of international cinema or different things, at a certain point once you hit uni, really. But definitely Middle Earth, I guess, is the easy answer.
Question 3. When you were a kid, what was the dream job?
Various things. I was obviously a football fan, so they will have gone through the elements of wanting to be a footballer until realising I'm not capable of being a footballer. I think for a long period of time I wanted to be a travel writer, so I read, your Bill Bryson kind of stuff in college and that area, and I kind of thought that would be quite appealing. So I guess it was probably that, or leaning towards being a musician, because I played the drums for quite a lot of years when I was growing up and never really successfully got into the right band or did the right thing. But yeah, it was probably a travel writer for the longest period.
I just watched Convoy and wanted to be a truck driver when that was my...
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. Gaming history, where is your start point? What journey have you been on?
I kind of gamed since I was probably, young enough to remember, really. So I had an Amiga 500 and 600. Wow. I think our Amiga 500 got robbed at one point, so I remember it being upgraded slightly when we got a replacement. And the Amiga was post the Atari, but it was more, you had a keyboard and a proper kind of screen.
The Amiga was like the dream machine at one point. I mean, they were going for like
so many games,
£400 to £500 to get one brand new.
Yeah, and you used to copy the games, so you used to just have infinite amounts of games. So one person had an original, and then it was copied about 1,000 times on floppy disk.
Some poor developer sat listening to this, weeping.
Well, I know, but I think they all did it themselves at that point. It was one of those things. I mean, for me, that was the kind of launch of knowing what games were like. And there were some big developers at that time, big British developers. So Sensible Software were the kind of major one with the Amiga breakout. Yeah. So they did Sensible Soccer that a lot of people know. I adored Cannon Fodder and all the kind of spin-offs they did from those games. And it kind of branched into console stuff. So there was the kind of mix of things you would get on a Mega Drive on an Amiga. So it was a massive range of stuff. My beloved console is probably my N64, which I still got. I think that was the kind of when games, Rare were big at that time. They were a huge developer, and just the kind of groundbreaking elements of 3D gaming, really. So it moved from, your classic 2-bit, 16, bit stuff into the more enhanced, your Mario 64s and your GoldenEyes and whatnot. So that was the kind of breakthrough, and that's when I probably played games the most. I did briefly shift to an Xbox 360, and then I moved back to a PS4 to play all the kind of games of that generation I'd missed, really. And I'm kind of quite deep-rooted in PlayStation. I've never been a PC knowledgeable gamer. I've never had the kit or the knowledge or the, I kind of always admire people that have built their own PC and they work on these incredible machines and stuff. But I've always been a kind of casual console gamer. I go from playing Super Mario to playing Last of Us Part 2, and it's like, you couldn't go for more chalk and cheese, but you need that. You need a little bit of, Animal Crossing after you played Last of Us 2 and had your heart ripped out and stomped on, basically. So, games are fascinating because they can just do everything, really.
It's a pretty special place to play, that's for sure. We will go into the main event, and obviously you've got to pick 3 games. What, Rory, would be game number 1?
So I've tried to do a game from kind of each generation, I guess. And it's really tricky when you do this because we've done things like top 5s, and even that's quite a challenge. But I'm probably going to pick GoldenEye on the N64. I toyed with Streets of Rage 2 because I probably played that more than anything else. And that was my first kind of proper multiplayer, your side-scroll co-op with my best mate growing up and all that. But I think GoldenEye, because I loved the film at the time, and I think it was the first kind of game that really captured something like that in game format. It kind of introduced what we know today in terms of multiplayer. So, I remember having 4 people around a small box telly, so you've all got a tiny quarter screen, and being able to strafe and take people out. If you were good at it, you would just clean up. And it was it was the first kind of bragging rights game, I guess, if you were good at a multiplayer game like that. But also the levels, I remember obsessing over getting all the cheat codes. You had to do some of the levels in just ridiculous time over and over and over again, just to be able to turn on like giant heads or paintball mode or whatever it was. It was just incredible. I loved every aspect of it, and it's kind of something you don't forget, and GoldenEye's probably always that game people kind of hark back to.
I'm surprised actually GoldenEye hasn't cropped up before, because I reckon that has to be one of the most beloved first-person shooters ever created. Like you say, the bragging rights as well. If you're in the same room as the person, you can drag these bragging rights out for a bit. You can really rub it in.
I mean, I haven't played FIFA or anything for years, but if you had a FIFA tournament at uni, you would. Man. You were a hero. You'd be literally walking on air after that. Whereas if you're playing online with some shit that quits the game when you score a last-minute winner or whatever, there's nothing nice about that.
what would be game number 2?
Yeah, so this is probably recency bias because I literally played this over the weekend and yesterday in a couple of days. I played a remastered version. So Shadow of the Colossus is my game number 2.
Right. Yes.
So it was a PlayStation 2 game. I can't remember who the developer are, but they did a game called Ico, which is
I remember that.
quite
iconic.
Yeah. So that's what it's, that was their first studio outing. And then they made this game, Shadow of the Colossus. And if you want to look at where something like Breath of the Wild gets its influence from, you just have to go back and look at this game, because the premise is that you rock up into this kind of shrine at the beginning, which is very Zelda-esque. You have to beat all these Colossus, which are these giant kind of mythical creatures, all of which are different ways to battle them, essentially. But there's, other than that, there's nothing in between. So you are riding around the environments with a sword, which kind of gives you an imprint of where you need to go on the map to find them. These surroundings, which were just stunningly developed. So there's no battling in between. I've never played a game that's just purely about bosses. I can't remember what it was originally. So the remastered version I just played had 16 of these giant beasts, but I think it was either 8 or 12, and they've added a few in when they've remastered it. You just rock up to the first one, having ridden the horse for about 5 minutes, and there's landscape, there's incredible landscape, but no fighting in between. There's never been a game that's really done that before. What games normally do is focus you on all the in-between, whereas this was just about, it was the sole focus of getting to this beast and then finding a way to defeat it. And the way you go about defeating them is either luring them into attacking you so you can jump up on them, you climb up the elements of them that you can climb up the fur, and then you have to find a weak spot which you capitalize. You've got a bow as well with infinite arrows, and you've got a sword, and that's it. You don't have any high-tech fancy fighting systems. You don't have anything you would see in a modern game that's got combinations or anything. You've just got to hold on, and you've got a stamina bar to hold on. And if you fall off, then you fall off a long way, and you've got to repeat that process all over again. But the thing at the time was just discovering how to actually beat them. You've got giant ones with big axes, you've got ones that fly, you've got underwater ones. It's just fascinating because it was just so revolutionary and so different. And it just felt like pure escapism, I guess, in the game. Yeah. Now, it's only, 4 or 5 hours worth of gameplay, I guess. It may be longer at the time when I'd first played it because I had no idea what I was doing.
Yeah,
but it was hard, and if you died, you start back in this shrine again, and you've got to go all the way back. And half the time, it was just finding the little entrance. Sometimes it's an underwater kind of temple, or it's or you've got to be on your horse with your bow and kind of find a weak spot under its foot. It's just a very different style of game. It's extraordinarily Japanese. There's no words really. It's just the occasional thing which has got subtitles on screen, but it's such a different experience, and it is a very beloved game.
Like you say, it was like it hadn't really been seen before, and I feel it almost in some respects paves the way for games like Bloodborne and the Dark Souls.
Yeah, I do think there's an influence from that game, which you'll get games in a certain generation that have really impacted what people make next, and I think Shadow of the Colossus of that era, you can directly pinpoint it to a lot of games that are made now. You could see the Assassin's Creed element of it. There's a lot of climbing in that game.
Yeah.
It's not quite as free climbing as Zelda, but that would go back to Shadow of the Colossus, I'd say, in terms of the first thing that had like a stamina bar and a climbing meter. So if you run out of stamina, you're going to fall. And the conditions are there where they're obviously all, these giant beasts are trying to fling you off and you've got to hold on for dear life. It's just one that I think deserves to kind of be recognised.
Phenomenal choice.
It's extremely replayable. It's one of those games that you would always get a different thing out of each time, which I think is important in games.
Your first 2 games there, you've picked 2 that I would say are definite foundation stones, influences have carried across the years. Are we coming right up to date with game 3?
We're close. So I would go with The Last of Us, and I'm sure you'll get it quite a lot. It's obviously
part 1, part 2.
Part 1.
Okay. Yep.
Because I adore part 2, and I hated all the narrative that came out of that. All the, you talk about toxic, and I mean, I've never seen anything quite as toxic as a reaction to that. I mean, what did you expect they were going to do? Do you know what I mean? Were they just going to let Joel and Ellie have a nice retirement plan?
Yeah.
It's a groundbreaking game. It's mostly linear, so it's not really open world as such, which is kind of Naughty Dog style. But there are elements of open worlds when you first first kind of enter Seattle as a city. And what they've done there is just like nothing I've seen in gaming. I mean, obviously we're right on the cutting edge of what they can do in terms of this generation, and they've really maximised that. But the storytelling and the boldness I've really never seen before. But in terms of going back to the original, I think it's the first game you could see being adapted, which it is being adapted by HBO into a series, in fairness. But it's the first game you could see being made into a film or being adapted where the story is so exceptional and the storytelling is so exceptional that although the gameplay matters and again is extremely good, it's the story that you're playing the game for. And other games have done this in the past, but not to the same success or the same extent. That opening section in The Last of Us, when you're trying to save your daughter and you're trying to flee,
man. It's heartbreaking. It hits hard.
I know, and I cannot wait to see what HBO do with it, because there's some really good people working on the project. It's the team behind Chernobyl. I can really see how successful it will be and how well it'll adapt. But it's just heartbreaking, and it's phenomenal storytelling within 20 minutes or 10 minutes, 15, 20 minutes. You're just like, I've never played anything like this. And, and I've always kind of been quite big into zombie kind of stuff and post-apocalyptic stuff. It's a big part of what I like, but I've never seen it done so successfully where, the characters feel extremely real as to what would happen in that situation. And someone like Joel has to make extremely difficult life choices, which you would have to make. It's a realistic kind of portrayal. I mean, The Walking Dead has long since gone downhill, but the first season of The Walking Dead was just phenomenal television, especially the opening episode. And you can see that kind of, 28 Days Later and those kind of things are massive influences of games like this. But The Last of Us takes that and it throws you into being the characters. So you've got to make those kind of decisions. I think there's an element of just that relationship between Joel and Ellie. He captures a relationship like I don't think another game has ever captured, really, because he lost his daughter a long time ago and is extremely closed off emotionally. She's just kind of a still petulant child, but with real kind of heart and grit and determination, but still personality. She's still got that kind of cheeky kind of side of her, and she's just a really interesting character that you see kind of grow and develop. And there's some really interesting choices they make along the way, and it is just a phenomenal game.
And I also think if someone who doesn't game probably doesn't appreciate what The Last of Us can do. It's like you're inside this incredible cinematic experience. It
brought in gamers that weren't there before, I think. I think it's a kind of game that, there's certain TV shows that might have brought in non-nerds into the kind of, there's those cross kind of boundary things where you're suddenly getting people watching The Mandalorian who've never watched Star Wars before, really. Or you get people watching certain shows. Game of Thrones, I don't even know how that became a mainstream show, really.
We all
I know it's huge budget. But Game of Thrones is not traditionally popular. You wouldn't get your average Joe in the past watching a show like that. Not in my opinion. Obviously, it's huge budget, huge scale, huge storytelling stuff. But it just surprises me, The boundaries are now crossing quite a lot. Obviously, you get like a Witcher TV show on Netflix and you get everyone wanting to make their own little part of this, and it is going to keep doing that as we go forward, because gaming has become such an influential thing in media that it's bound to happen. So, I think what Naughty Dog are doing and what they did with that game in particular is just kind of, breaking ground, really, along with Rockstar. Other studios, aspire to, really, and we'll continue to try and get towards, but that's the kind of goal, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it should be celebrated. Like you say, the toxic environment that followed Last of Us 2. Let's just celebrate what we've got. Let's celebrate the fact we can play these games. You do have to burn a game that has always tormented you. Which game would that be?
So strangely, and I've really struggled with this, actually, it's quite a tricky choice. I've gone for a really popular game that I've even mentioned, so I would go for Sonic the Hedgehog.
Oh wow, I love controversy.
Yeah, because on the surface, you remember it being a really enjoyable, really quick-paced, enjoyable, fast game, amazing 2D. And that maybe is the case for the first two levels. But once you get, and my little boy tries to make me do this for him because he plays, Sonic on the Switch and we've got a little old Mega Drive. and I just cannot get past certain levels. They drive me bloody crazy, absolutely livid. I get so angry and annoyed with it because I think games developed then have a simple formula, and when Sonic works really well, it's when you're going extremely quickly, and but there's a lot of Sonic where you end up in water situations where you've got to find a bubble within 5 seconds.
I'm having
and
flashbacks.
if you miss a jump on some of these levels, you're done,
Yeah.
And the bonus games are even more frustrating. So there's where you're bouncing off those
Like the
balls
pinball.
and you've got to cut. Yeah. And you've got to colour them all a certain colour. And if you bounce off them the wrong way, they send you backwards. And it's just so infuriating. I've never got so angry at a game in all my life. And I think you see things with rose tinted, specs a little bit because you know what a pioneer Sonic was, and it was.
Yeah.
And it's less so in Sonic 2 and Sonic and Knuckles because they are developed a little bit more. But in the original, it's just so many frustrating elements of it that games that you'd be able to complete as a kid, you just can't touch when you get older because you lose. I don't know if it's the motor skills change or that part of your brain changes, but I just can't get near that. I cannot complete some of these levels, and they just extremely frustrating. I can't remember having picked up, say, bad games very often. There will be games that do come along now and again, but I think back in the day you would have just traded it because you would have been annoyed with it. I don't think you would have stuck with it. I think, but something like this where your son is begging you to do it and you just physically can't without literally wanting to launch the controller across the room. I think it's got to be that, to be honest. So,
that's a great choice. That's interesting because when you say Sonic, the first thing I hear is that Sega intro, and then I just see the Green Hill Zone and nothing else.
Yeah,
so
Green Hill Zone's great.
I just blacked it out.
Green Hill Zone is wonderful, but once you get to the one after, I mean, Casino Night's amazing still. Some of the worlds are great, but some of them are just infuriating. And the boss battles, you take one wrong turn and you end up in the lava and the water. It's not buggy because it's a smooth game, but there's just these glitchy type elements of it where you can take one tiny step wrong and die, and it's such a kind of surprise. You're clinging on to that one ring when you've been hit by the boss about 86 times. There's a fine line between frustration and challenge and reward. Games have to walk that really careful line because if it's just too frustrating, it just makes you annoyed. Whereas if there's a reward there, then you'll keep coming back to it. Yeah. So it's a tricky one.
But then again, perhaps this is just your Nintendo bias. Bias
kick. I was a Mega Drive guy. On our podcast, I had a Mega Drive versus SNES debate because I had a Mega Drive.
You need a companion on the island from the vast world of gaming. And who are you taking?
So I thought about this in the practical terms, because if you're stuck on a desert island, you need someone who is useful, I would say, and good company. So I ran through your classic, your Nathan Drakes and your Lara Crofts and stuff. But I would go with Ellie from The Last of Us, because I think she'd keep me quite G'd up in terms of she's got a really good personality and really enjoyable to be around, albeit it could be quite frustrating and annoying as a companion at times, but that's all part and parcel. But I know you've not played The Last of Us 2, but she is probably an exceptional, she's a machine, she's extremely versatile and useful in terms of hunting on an island. She would be certainly a go-to. And just, a good person to be with, I'd say, as a rule. I think as characters go, she's probably one of the most well-rounded of gaming history, really. I mean, Joel is a bit of a closed book and you learn more about him, but she's extremely open and you know all the kind of character traits and her funny kind of personality, and she's great. Even in the second game, she's got moments that surprise you. There's a couple of flashbacks and moments where you really do get a sense of a kind of innocence when she's in this world. Someone to keep you going on an island, I think she'd be a good companion.
That is actually the first time a character's made a second appearance on the island. She was chosen by one of them for very similar reasons. Were there any games you were kind of teetering on, were on the verge of picking?
So, Streets of Rage 2 was definitely up there. Again, probably quite an influential game. I know those games don't exist in what we know nowadays, really, but still just a really smooth side-scrolling, great soundtrack, amazing visuals.
And it stood out at a time when we were drenched in those sort of games.
In terms of more recent gaming, Horizon Zero Dawn is a phenomenal game. I've replayed that recently, having had time, and I'm really excited for the sequel and what's to come with that.
Thank you so much, mate. It's been an absolute pleasure. Cheers, Rory. Much appreciated.
Cheers, mate.
Thank you, mate. Until next time, goodbye.